let's move on to the topic that you've all been waiting for. Second interview questions. What I mean is, when you go for a second job interview, what type of questions are they going to ask you and how do you handle them? Okay. Now, this happens more often than a lot of people would think. There are some jobs where they just do one job interview with you and then that's it. You're hired or you're not hired. It's over. But there's a lot of jobs where there's rounds of job interviews. So there could be 2 job interviews. There could be, I went to I did a video of this like years ago. One of the first videos on this channel where I talked about the time I had to do 9 job interviews to get a job. And I got the job, but it was 9 job interviews. Anyway, that's ridiculous, just so everybody knows. That's not normal. That's a wild exception. But doing 2, 3, or sometimes 4 job interviews, especially for very high-paying jobs or jobs that are right up the organizational chart, like you're an executive or a mid-level manager, that's not uncommon. So the question is, how is the second job interview different from the first job interview? And what skills do you need to pass the second interview? Let's dive in. Okay. First thing, if you're going to a second job interview, it could either be with the person that conducted the first job interview with you, or it could be with a different person. Okay. We got to get that out of the way first. Now, if it's with a new person, chances are it's going to be very similar to your first interview, okay? Because you're with a new person. They're probably going to start out by asking pretty much all the same questions again. The standard questions, the future question, the past question, the salary question, all that stuff, right? Okay. So if you pass the first interview with a different person, you're probably going to do okay on the second interview, assuming that you're getting the same type of person. Okay. Now, I suppose the second interview could be with a different type of person. You interviewed with a recruiter, usually the first time. Second time, it's usually with a recruiter, but there may be someone else in the room. It could be a high-level manager of some kind. It could be the owner of the company. It could be other people who contribute to the decision of who gets hired. So it might not be the hiring manager, the person that you would report to if you got the job, but maybe one of their peers or a couple of their peers. Okay. Maybe they brought in somebody from the accounting department. Maybe they brought in someone from the marketing department. You could get other people in there, right? Now, sometimes these people will have a heavy participation and sometimes they'll just be observers. They just kind of sit back, right? But I suppose I better mention, just protocol. If you walk into a job interview and there's several people there that are going to be interviewing you, you shake their hand or you do, your greeting there, your elbow bump or your chest bump or whatever is the cultural way that you greet people in these types of social situations in a work environment, And then what's really handy is if you have a business card, that's great. If you don't, just so you know, you can print these things up for literally $20. You can get a whole stack of business cards. If you have a LinkedIn profile, then you have everything you need to put on a business card. It's just your name, your tagline, right? Like engineer, sales professional, whatever you are. And then your contact information and maybe a little professional picture of yourself in the corner. There you go. That's all you need. And what you do is you give these out to everybody in the room. If you have them in a chest pocket like this, you can just give out your card. And what that is the prompt for them to give you their card. So now you know who you're speaking to. You see their name on their card, you see their title, and it says recruiter. You're like, okay. And the other person says, CEO. And you're like, okay. Right? The other person says production inventory manager, something like that. And you're like, okay. Right? So you know who these people are, and you can position them on the table in front of you so that, if you've got 4 people sitting in a line, right? You put 4 business cards in front of you. So that's Jerry, that's Linda, that's Franklin, and that's Alfalfa, the CEO. Okay. So If you can't remember that person's name, you can look down at the card. And then when they ask you a question, you say, why, thank you, Alfalfa, for that very insightful question. And here's my answer. And you see, top marks. Now, that helps. Okay, so that's just a protocol if you're doing a interview with a lot of people in the room. This helps you get their names straight, and you can refer to them by name. People love that. People love it. It's a sign of respect, and people subconsciously like it when you use their name because it's a sign of respect. It means that I care about you enough to commit your name to memory, and I remember who you are. That's another sign of respect, right? So consciously or subconsciously, people like this. It'll help you endear yourself to them. Okay. Now, knowing who they are, like if someone's a recruiter, they're probably going to be looking for certain things in your answers. Whereas if someone is a CEO, they'll be looking most likely for different things in your answers. For example, a CEO will care more about your general attitude and possibly your ambitions. They'll care more about that than more technical details like why are you looking for a job right now? A recruiter would care more about that, right? So knowing who you're talking to really helps. If you're talking to an accountant, that's handy to know because then you can talk in terms of money, right? In my last job, I implemented this change, which resulted in a savings of $52,000 per year for 2 years, something like that. And the accountant will go, I like the cut of your jib, right? So that's kind of some background to this. Okay, so you could be talking to the original person or you could be talking to a new person. If it's a new person, generally it's the first interview over again. They're going to cover the same material. From now on, we're going to talk about the case where it's the same person again. Okay, so you've already had the first interview with them. They've already gotten answers for the standard interview questions that they most likely asked you. Okay, now you're talking to them again. What are they going to ask? Well, here's usually how it works. Okay, the first round of job interviews, that's where they take a rather superficial look at you. Okay, they don't really care or remember your, details of precisely why you're, applying for this job or precisely what you can bring to it. They care more about like, what are your salary expectations? Do you have a history of being fired from your job that would suggest that you would likely get fired from this one or you'd have a higher risk of getting fired? They're looking for stuff like that in the first interview. In the second interview, they're going to want to take a closer look at you. Okay? So they're going to want to go deeper beyond some of the superficial canned answers that you may have given in your first interview. Okay? I wrote down some notes. These are not in any particular order. I'm just going to go through them randomly, just sort of one at a time. Everyone loves that, by the way. Okay, so the fact that you've come back, they've called you back in for a second interview, that tends to suggest a few things. First of all, it suggests that you passed the first round. Okay, that's good. Now, what does that mean? That means that at this point, your resume looks good. It's a pass. Everything you'd written on your resume or original job application, that's a pass. Nothing got you eliminated. Okay. In the first interview, the answers that you gave to the questions they asked you, those were acceptable. So you passed those questions. Okay. That's what it says so far. It also says that the soft skills that you demonstrated at the first interview were a pass. In their mind, those were sufficient. There weren't any red flags with, how you communicated, how professional you behaved and looked. Your grooming and attire was appropriate. You were reasonably likable. Okay, so you didn't fail because they just found you off-putting or in any way, something like that. So that tends to suggest that all of those things were a pass. Okay, so that's what we're going on. Now they want to go deeper. I don't know where I say this. I do actually write that down later on. The big thing here is that, remember, if they ask you the same questions again, which they could, you must give a consistent answer. So if you answered one way the first time they asked you, and they ask you the same question again at the second interview, if you give a completely different answer, like that tends to contradict, or you're changing your story in some way, that can be a red flag. So this is where it's important to remember what you said at the first interview. Now, if you're the type of person that you haven't quite got your story straight, you're kind of saying different answers every time you go to a different job interview to see what might work better or something like that, this is where it might be a problem. Okay, as much as possible, if you could remember what you said the first time and you say it again, that will help. Like saying, why did you leave your last job? They may ask you that the first interview, and you may give a reason. Now, if they decide to ask you that question again at the second interview, there's two possibilities. One, they're incompetent and they, forgot that they asked you that or something. Or two, they're strategically, intentionally asking you the same thing again because they're wanting to either go deeper or they're wanting to check your story. So if you were now to give a different reason why you left your last job, they would actively see that as a red flag. Something's not jiving here with this person. They're changing their story. They gave one answer. This was the reason why I left, or this is, I'm currently employed, right now. And then a week later, when they call you in again, you say, oh no, I've left that job. I left it a long time ago. And, I was fired or something, like that's going to be a red flag. Just the fact that you changed your story, not specifically what you said. Okay. In absolute terms. So, number one, consistency. Get your answers down. Don't change your story. Okay. The other danger of the second interview is that if you're interviewing with the same person again, and I've seen a lot of recruiters actually actively encourage this, you may feel that this person now is no longer a stranger. You already know them, and you might be friends, right? It kind of starts to feel like that. They're kind of talking to you more like you're their friend, yeah, we've already met each other. We know who we are. The problem is that they're trying to get you to let your guard down. Now, when they probe you for more information, you tend to, maybe earlier in the first interview, you had your guard up. You were kind of very reserved in what you said. You only said the answer that you had rehearsed and you had vetted. But maybe they ask you again in the second interview. Now it feels like you're friends, you're buddies, you're talking. And now you speak a bit more off the cuff. It's a bit, you're shooting from the hip. It's unrehearsed. You're going into detail that you never planned to say in a job interview, right? This is the danger, okay? Don't fall for that. That's a technique that a lot of people have used. A lot of recruiters use to try and go deeper. They give this false impression that we're buddies. We can speak freely. This is more informal. Don't fall for it. Okay. Keep your guard up. Only say things that you've rehearsed and that you've vetted and or you've thought about in advance. So you're not just talking off the top of your head about stuff. Try and minimize that even in the second interview. Okay. That's a very important point. Okay, now coming back to what are they going to ask? A common thing in a second interview is they're going to ask more behavioral-based questions. Okay, so they got the broad strokes of your background in the first interview. They can see your resume. They might ask basic questions on your resume like, this job here, you can't see my finger, but I'm pointing down at the resume. This job here, it says here you worked for 2 years doing this, and it says here you did this function. What's that all about? What were your job duties? Tell me about a time that, you had to do this, or give me a typical day, what would you do in a day, kind of thing. So they're asking you general questions about what's on your resume. Okay. And you give general answers. Well, I worked in that role and here was the deal, right? Second interview, they're probably going to want to go deeper. They're going to say, okay, in this role, it says here you worked as this. That's very similar to the role we're hiring for. have you ever encountered this particular scenario? And if you have, how did you handle it? Right? They're going to want to go deeper. They want the details. They want to see if it says here, you know how to do this. Let's see if that's true. Let's ask you a technical question about that. Tell me about an accomplishment you had during that. Tell me about a time you had to encounter this particular situation. Now, if you're like, I don't know, I suppose I did this, that suggests that you're really not that competent and not that familiar with this material. But if they ask you a very specific question and you say, oh yeah, well, there was a time about 2 months ago where that exact thing happened. This is what specifically occurred. This is what I did, and it was based on this reasoning, and this is how it turned out. And it reinforced the idea that you always should do this first so that you avoid this particular issue on the back end. And that's what I've always tried to conform to. And that was demonstrated right here. That's how I handled it, and it worked out okay. Something like that. And then they think, okay, this person knows their stuff. They're not just saying that they've done this. They're demonstrating that they know how to do this. So that's usually what a second interview is used for if you're talking to the same person again. Okay, that's in a nutshell. The only other thing I'll say about this is that, generally speaking, in a second interview, one common thing that some recruiters will push for or try to get a feel for are, for want of a better word, your values. Okay, like what are your priorities? So within this job, you said you did this particular work. You were in customer service for this type of product. You worked in there for 2 years. Okay, when you're handling customer service calls, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize customer satisfaction above everything? Do you prioritize, like the length of the call above everything? Basically saying, I will help you out as much as I possibly can, but if we can't resolve this in 5 minutes, it's time to move on, or something like that. Or do you prioritize something else? Like what's your attitude to, if they start to get defensive or upset on the phone, what's your approach to that? Like things like this. They want to get a feel for your values because different companies and different individuals handle these things different ways. And they want to get a sense for how you would handle it. Okay, so that's a common theme of a lot of second or third or fourth interviews. They like to follow up with things like this and go really deep. Okay, so be prepared for this. And I guess to try and wrap this up, what do you do about it? First of all, be consistent with what you said the first time around. Then prepare even more behavioral interview question answers. So success stories, rehearse these. Rehearse saying them in the was it the STAR format? I want to say SWOT. It's not SWOT. It's STAR. In the STAR format, rehearse them so it's nice and compact. And you've rehearsed what you're going to say, so you don't say something that suggests some kind of weird red flag that you might not want to convey. Okay, so you can prepare for those, and you can just rehearse different scenarios. Because they will likely ask you about different difficult scenarios, different situations that you might encounter in this role. And you should have answers for how you handle it. What have you done in the past? What are your priorities, your values for dealing with that? And so on. Hopefully that makes sense. That's what I would say. In general, if you're talking to a CEO at the meeting, they sit in on the meeting. They care about your attitude. They care about your enthusiasm for the role. They care about possibly your ambition, like I said. And the last thing I had here was always send a thank you note afterwards. This is not so much because the thank you note works wonders, but it's because you can expect that all the other candidates have sent thank you notes. So the fact that you didn't, that can single you out in a bad way. So just make sure that you've done that. Very simple to do, to say thank you for the opportunity to interview with you today. I found it quite fascinating. It reinforced my enthusiasm for this role, this particular job, and I'm curious to see where it goes. Should you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask. Other than that, have a good day. Something like that, very quick. And that's it, really. That's all I have to say, unless people have questions.